This story is based on a real case that shocked America. A 68-year-old woman was found drenched and trembling at a New Jersey rest stop. Her family's car had vanished, leaving her behind in the storm. At first, people thought it was a mistake, but what unfolded later revealed something darker, a deliberate act of abandonment, a quiet plan to erase her from their lives. This is not just a story about an abandoned mother, it's a story about America's silent epidemic, the forgotten, the discarded, the elderly left behind. And one woman's decision to stop being a victim and start taking her life back. Her name was Ruth Bennett, and this is her story. The storm does not arrive so much as it swallows the day. You can hear it first low and distant, like a subway you can't see rolling across the flatlands of central New Jersey, getting louder until the sky just gives up and opens. The New Jersey Turnpike slows to a crawl. Hazard lights wink in the blur. A service plaza, one of those off-ramps with the chrome letters and the pretzel smell, is suddenly a harbor for the stranded. Cars nose into any open lane. People run bent at the waist, jackets over their heads, shoes slapping water. Inside the women's room, hand dryers roar, paper towels shred against wet palms. A grandmotherly voice, Ruth Bennett, says, "Be right back," to no one in particular, the way people talk when they've spent most of their life looking after others. She dabs at her cheeks with a rough brown towel, folds it into a rectangle as if neatness can anchor a day like this, and steps into the hallway. The sound hits her full in the chest. Rain, heavy and hard, as if the sky has weight again. Ruth is 68 years old. Practical shoes. A windbreaker she bought at the church rummage sale because the zipper still worked. Her hair is pinned back the way she wore it when she waited tables on double shifts out of the way. Stay moving, keep the line short. She doesn't carry a purse to the restroom. She never has. It's a habit made from years of, "I'll just be a minute," and the belief that the people you love will still be where you left them when you come back. She pushes through the door and the world turns to static. The rain is not falling, it's coming sideways. Parking space lines are barely visible, shallow rivers where the paint should be. The air tastes metallic, lightning close enough to smell. Ruth holds her windbreaker over her head and jogs the distance she remembers 4 aisles down. Third row, white sedan with a dented rear bumper and a church sticker, she once joked, made it look like the car went to Sunday school. She slows. There is a black minivan in the spot where a white sedan should be. For a few seconds, the brain does what it does when the unthinkable lands. It offers possibilities, harmless ones, little white lies meant to keep the ground steady. Wrong row, wrong angle. They moved to pick her up closer to the door. They circled the lot to keep the baby from crying. She scans the rows, nostrils stinging with rain, breath fogging in bursts, repeating the plate number in her head the way you say a psalm when you need courage. KN7. She can't remember the last 2. She never needed to. She had people for that. Her people. The camera of the imagination sees her from above, a small figure in a big storm, cutting diagonals through the lot like a chess piece, the rain drawing bright stitches across the frame with every gust. She checks the next row, then the next. A trucker idles near the edge of the lot, staring into the middle distance as if he's been on the road for 18 hours and still owes the country more miles. A teenager in a soggy varsity hoodie sprints past with a paper bag over his head. No white sedan, no church sticker, no dent. Her heartbeat goes thin and fast. That's when the practical habits start to clash with the new reality. She pats her pockets as if by magic a phone might appear. She reaches for a purse that isn't there and knows, of course she knows, she left it on the floorboard like she always does. It's raining too hard to think, and, under the storm, there is another sound that makes itself known, something like a diagnosis. Simple and undeniable. They're gone. She doesn't accept that. Not yet. She keeps moving. She checks every white car, sedans, crossovers, one with a sun-faded political sticker so old it has become a Rorschach test. She crouches to see through windows because rain on glass is a mirror. She whispers, "Eric?" The way you whisper a child's name at the playground and expect to see sneakers appear from behind the slide. "Jenna?" She presses a palm to the window of a car that is not hers and feels the cold like a dare. Believe it. Lightning splits the sky to the north, a crack of light that sews the clouds together for a single second. Thunder walks across the plaza a moment later, a delayed concussion that trembles in the sternum. Ruth stops in the center lane, straightens up, and the camera comes in close on her face. Rain in the lashes, lips parted as if a thought is about to speak itself into the world and can't find the word. Behind her, a bus exhales its brakes, and a door folds shut with the finality of a decision already made. "Ma'am?" a voice says, soft but insistent. A young woman in a navy polo holds an umbrella wide. Her name tag shines when the lightning flickers again. Tanya. "You're gonna get sick out here. Come on in. We've got hot coffee." Ruth blinks like someone waking to a different room than the one she fell asleep in. She tries to say, "I'm fine," because that is the sentence she has worn like a uniform for 40 years. What comes out is a small sound, round and wet, the kind of sound a person makes when a truth breaks the surface. Tanya doesn't push. She angles the umbrella so Ruth can straighten her shoulders under its edge and walks her toward the glass doors. "You with someone?" the young woman asks, not unkindly, just the way a person at a counter asks questions to move the line. Ruth nods reflexively, then shakes her head, then nods again as if the facts can be arranged to make this not what it is. Inside the lobby, the lights are too bright. The floor is a chessboard of black and white tiles. Somewhere a baby wails. Somewhere a fryer pops. It smells like pretzels, coffee, wet denim. At a corner table, Tanya sets a paper cup in Ruth's hands and steps away as if giving someone space is a form of kindness she learned at home. The paper cup warms Ruth's fingers. Her fingerprints leave damp ovals where the rain has not yet dried. She inhales, she exhales. She tries to count to 5, the way the nurse taught her in the urgent care last winter when her chest tightened for reasons no scan could name. 5 is too many, 3 will do. She thinks of small proofs. The way Eric drummed his fingers on the steering wheel when he was a teenager, exactly like his father did when Free Bird came on the radio. The way Jenna says literally for emphasis, young enough to still be daring about adverbs. The baby seat in the back, the one with the avocado stains from last week's meltdown. The way Ruth kept a pack of wipes in the door pocket, because being prepared is a form of love. People like that don't just leave. Not people you raised. Not people you tucked into beds and stayed up ironing shirts for and scraped quarters together so they could have the good field trip. The rain slams the windows again, hard enough that a few heads turn. Across the room, a TV over the pizza counter plays a local news loop on mute red radar blobs sweeping past places that have their own small histories for the families passing through. The words scrolling across the bottom are about traffic and a ball game and a fundraiser for a volunteer firehouse. Ordinary life, marching on like the storm, is just weather, nothing more. Ruth reaches instinctively for the pocket where her phone should be. Empty. Her purse, with her wallet, her ID, the spare keys, the photo of her and Eric at his 8th grade graduation where his hair fell into his eyes and he pretended he didn't like the way she hugged him. None of it is here. The truth doesn't shout, it settles. It sits down across from you and folds its hands and waits for you to speak first. A plaza manager approaches older than Tanya, a man with tired eyes who has watched people at their worst and at their best in exactly this kind of weather. "Ma'am, if you need us to call someone, we can," he says. "Or the state police. If you're..." Ruth shakes her head quickly, a child's reflex, the yes that is too dangerous to allow in the room. Shame is a small, efficient machine. It hums without effort. In America, the story we tell about family is that it holds. To voice the opposite is to set off sirens. Outside, the storm begins to lighten. Not stop, just thin. The sound changes pitch. The fluorescent hum of the lobby comes back into focus. Somewhere, a lottery machine chirps. The coffee warms her mouth, and then does nothing heat without comfort. She sets the cup down. The paper is flimsy. It leaves a ring on the fake wood table like a permanent record of a temporary moment. She looks toward the doors as if willpower alone could conjure headlamps. The familiar shape of a white sedan, her son's face caught between guilt and relief. There is nothing there but rain. When the lightning rolls south, the parking lot becomes a mirror. Ruth can see herself faintly, a woman in a borrowed umbrella's afterglow, small and sturdy, the kind of woman who kept other people fed while the rest of the world made bigger plans. She stands, abandoning the coffee, drawn back outside by a habit that doesn't know it's outlived its usefulness. When you can't find what you love, you keep looking. You don't stop until someone tells you to stop. She steps under the plaza's awning and listens to the waterfall from its edge in a single shimmering curtain. The rain is softer now. The truth is not. A taxi idles by the curb, its light on, a driver leaning on the wheel with the patience of a man who has seen every kind of day. Ruth watches her reflection in the glass door tremble with each passing gust. And in that waver she hears the sentence clearly, for the first time without a hedge or a hope. They left me. The camera holds on her face. Not tears. Not yet. Just a settling. A quiet. That's when the thought arrives that isn't about weather or coffee or shame. If your own family can leave you in a storm, what else are they willing to do? But what Ruth didn't know, not yet, was that the storm that took her family that night wasn't the end of her nightmare. It was only the beginning of a plan so cold, so deliberate, it would make her question everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and blood. The taxi driver didn't ask questions. He just drove, windshield wipers slicing through the last of the storm as Ruth sat silent in the back seat, watching the highway lights smear across the window like ghosts. Every few miles she whispered to herself, maybe they thought I got another ride. Maybe they'll be home already. It wasn't belief, just a sentence to fill the silence. When the car pulled up to her cul-de-sac, dawn was just starting to bruise the sky. The houses looked the same. Identical lawns, identical mailboxes. America's idea of safety. Ruth paid with the cash a kind cashier had slipped into her palm. It's okay, honey, I've got a mom too. She climbed the steps, heart hammering in rhythm with the dripping gutter. Her fingers found the keypad, muscle memory tapping the same 4 digits she'd used for 20 years. The light blinked red. Wrong code. She tried again. Red. Again. Red. The air thickened. Inside, faint laughter drifted through the door, her son's voice, her daughter-in-law's giggle, the clink of glasses. Ruth pressed her ear against the door. Finally quiet, her son said. Yeah, his wife answered. We can breathe now. Her hand fell away. She knocked once, then twice. The laughter stopped. A chair scraped, and from behind the door came a whisper that froze her where she stood. Don't open it, we already decided. Morning sunlight spilled across the porch, but Ruth couldn't feel its warmth. She sat on the cold wooden bench by the door, her clothes still damp from the storm. Every sound in the neighborhood, the sprinklers, a barking dog, the hum of a delivery truck felt like part of another world she no longer belonged to. When the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Keegan, opened her blinds, Ruth forced a smile and waved. She didn't want questions. Just locked myself out, she called weakly, pretending everything was fine. Mrs. Keegan waved back, satisfied, and disappeared. The lie was easier than the truth. By midday, Ruth's hands had stopped shaking. The keypad still blinked red. She pressed it one last time, waited for the click that never came, and whispered, Please, Eric, just open the door. Instead, she heard it again, voices inside, quieter this time, but clear. Jenna's tone, sharp and measured. She can't stay here anymore, you know that. And Eric, the son she'd raised through every scraped knee and heartbreak, answered softly, I know, but we have to make it stick this time. The words hit her harder than the rain ever could. That night, Ruth didn't go anywhere. She curled up on the porch bench, knees to her chest, the cold settling into her bones. Sleep came in short, panicked bursts, dreams of headlights vanishing into fog, of her own reflection fading from glass. At sunrise, a grocery clerk from down the block spotted her and hurried over. Ma'am, you'll get sick out here, the young woman said, wrapping her jacket around Ruth's shoulders. Do you have someone I can call? Ruth opened her mouth, but no words came, because the truth was simple and unbearable. There was no one left to call, and yet deep down something was shifting. Beneath the shame, beneath the grief, a small, steady thought began to form. If her own son could lock her out, maybe it was time to find a way back in that didn't need his key. That night, as Ruth lay shivering beneath the thin porch light, her eyes caught a flicker through the living room window, her son and his wife raising glasses, toasting quietly to something she couldn't hear. And then she saw a manila folder on the table, her name written on the front in her daughter-in-law's handwriting. Inside that house, a plan was already unfolding, and Ruth Bennett was the only one who didn't know she was part of it. The next morning, Ruth woke to the sound of lawnmowers and children biking past ordinary life, moving on, as if the night before had never happened. Her back ached from the bench, her fingers stiff from cold. She stood, straightened her cardigan, and decided to pretend, at least for now, that she still belonged somewhere. When Mrs. Keegan came outside with her trash bins, Ruth smiled again, said she was staying with family while the house gets some work done. Lies, she found, were easier to carry than pity. Mrs. Keegan nodded, offered a polite, "Bless your heart," and went back inside. By noon, Ruth found herself at the diner she used to love, one of those off-highway spots with red stools and waitresses who call everyone sweetheart. The smell of burnt coffee felt like home. She ordered soup, counted the few dollar bills the cashier had given her the night before, and realized she'd have to make them last. As she stirred the soup, her reflection wavered in the window, a face she almost didn't recognize. Not old exactly, but tired in a way years don't explain. She had raised a son alone after losing her husband at 32, worked 2 jobs, paid off a house, and now somehow she was the one without a key. Later that day, she walked back to the house. This time, the door opened. Jenna was in the kitchen, hair wrapped in a towel, phone pressed to her shoulder. "Oh, hi, Ruth," she said with a too bright smile. "We were so worried last night. Eric thought you were staying at a friend's." Ruth nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to be a burden." "Of course not," Jenna said, turning back to her call. "You're never a burden." But Ruth could already feel it, the distance. Her room, once filled with the scent of lavender and old books, was now stripped bare. Her dresser gone, her photographs missing. In their place, dumbbells and a yoga mat. Jenna's voice drifted from the hallway. "We had to make some space. Hope that's okay." Ruth opened her closet empty. The old floral dresses she'd sewn herself, the cardigan her husband gave her before he passed, even her church hat all gone. "Where's my stuff?" she asked. Jenna didn't even look up. "Oh, that, most of it was worn out. We tossed it. You deserve new things anyway." Something cracked inside Ruth, not loudly, but deep, like the sound of wood splitting in a frozen forest. That evening, Eric came home. He saw her, paused, and said softly, "Oh, you're back." No hug, no apology, just a flicker of inconvenience. When Ruth finally gathered the courage to speak, her voice shook. "You left me there, Eric, in the rain." He didn't even flinch. "Mom, you're remembering it wrong. You must have wandered off. You've been forgetting things lately." Her breath caught. "Don't lie to me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, we all forget things sometimes. Maybe you should rest." The gaslight was gentle, practiced, the kind of cruelty that hides behind calm. That night, through the thin wall, Ruth heard them talking again. Their voices were faint, but she caught enough. "How much is still in her account?" Jenna whispered. "About 80 grand, Eric said. Plus the house. Once it's in our name, that's another 450 easy." Ruth froze. Then came the part that made her blood run cold. Let's finish this before she figures it out. She pressed her ear against the wall, heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. Whatever this was, it wasn't about forgetting. It was about erasing. Ruth sat in the dark, every light in the house off but her mind blazing awake. Somewhere between fear and fury, a thought took root. If they were making a plan for her, she was going to make one of her own. The next morning, Ruth waited until the house was still the soft hum of the dishwasher, the faint rhythm of her son snoring down the hall. She slipped on her shoes, tucked her damp wallet under her arm, and stepped into the pale light of dawn. The bus into town smelled like coffee and winter coats. She sat near the back, eyes fixed on the cracked vinyl seat ahead of her. A billboard passed outside the window. "Protect our seniors, report elder abuse." She almost laughed. It felt like the universe itself was mocking her, whispering, "Are you brave enough to tell the truth?" At the credit union, the teller looked up with polite surprise. "Miss Bennett, been a while." Ruth smiled faintly. "Yes, I just need to see what's left." When the printer began to hum, she braced herself for the worst, but the numbers shocked her. There was more than she remembered. Years of work, small savings, and careful interest had quietly grown into something that could keep her alive on her own. Far more than her son and Jenna had imagined. A quiet strength filled her chest. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. From there, she went to the regional bank, the one she'd opened decades ago when she first bought the house. The loan officer, a kind, middle-aged woman named Carla, smiled when she saw Ruth's paperwork. "You know, property values in your neighborhood have doubled since COVID. That house might be worth $600,000 now, easy." $600,000, not $450, not what they thought. Walking back toward the bus stop, Ruth stopped by a small park bench and sat down, the paper still in her hand. The morning sun hit the page, turning the ink silver. For the first time, she saw her situation for what it truly was: not a tragedy, but an opportunity. They saw an old woman too weak to fight back. What they didn't see was the survivor who'd once raised a child alone, while holding 2 jobs and an eviction notice in her pocket. Her heart hardened, not with hate, but with clarity. The game had changed. That afternoon, she found the old business card of an attorney she once knew, Daniel Whitaker, a name she hadn't said out loud in a decade. He had helped her once with her husband's insurance after the accident, long before Eric learned how to lie with a straight face. She dialed the number, half expecting a deadline, but his voice came on the 3rd ring, older, slower, but still steady. "Whitaker Law Office." "Daniel," she said quietly. "It's Ruth Bennett. I think my family is trying to take everything I own." There was a pause, not of disbelief, but of recognition. "Tell me everything," he said. For the next hour, Ruth spoke, the words trembling out of her like a storm she'd been holding inside too long. The highway, the rain, the locked door, the empty room, the whispers about her money. When she finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Daniel spoke, voice low and firm. "Mrs. Bennett, what they're doing isn't just wrong. It's illegal. You have rights. And you have proof?" Ruth hesitated. "Not yet." "Then start recording," he said. "Every word, every conversation. We'll build this piece by piece." By the time Ruth hung up, the fear that had lived in her bones for days had begun to drain away, replaced by something else: focus. That night, she went to bed early, pretending to be tired. In the dark, she listened to their laughter from down the hall, every joke about her, every whisper about the plan. She memorized it all. And for the first time since that storm, Ruth Bennett smiled. Because she finally had one too. As the laughter faded, Ruth reached under her pillow, fingers brushing against the small digital recorder she'd bought that afternoon. Tomorrow night she would press record, and when she did, their secret wouldn't belong to them anymore. Ruth's hands shook as she held the little recorder, no bigger than a matchbox, the red light blinking like a pulse. She'd practiced pressing the button in secret all day, over and over, until the motion felt like breathing. Tonight, she told herself, it begins. At dinner, she played her part, quiet, compliant, nodding at the right moments. Jenna complained about gas prices, Eric about work, the small talk of a family that no longer existed. Under the table, Ruth's thumb clicked the button. Recording. "Maybe we should move things along," Jenna said, slicing her chicken like a surgeon. Eric nodded. "Yeah, she's getting suspicious." "Then we do it before she calls anyone," Jenna replied. "Relax, she won't. She's too proud." Ruth's heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She chewed, swallowed, asked if anyone wanted pie. Later, in her room, she played it back. Their voices sounded colder than she remembered, clean, matter-of-fact evil, wrapped in the soft edges of domestic life. She saved the file, labeled it June 11 dinner. The next morning, Ruth met Daniel Whitaker downtown. His office was smaller than she remembered, stacks of folders crowding the shelves, but his handshake was still firm. "You did good," he said after hearing the recording. "Now, we make this official." He explained every step carefully, transferring her funds to a new undisclosed account, placing the house title in a living trust, updating her will with a clause that cut Eric and Jenna out completely. "You have the law on your side, Ruth. They can't take what's yours unless you let them." Ruth looked up, her voice steady. "Then I won't." For the first time, she saw herself not as a mother, not as a victim, but as the woman who'd survived every hard thing life had ever thrown her way. That afternoon, she walked into a quiet community bank in the next county. No shared accounts, no digital footprints. She transferred the money in 3 separate transactions, just as Daniel advised. The teller didn't ask questions. She just smiled and handed Ruth the receipts, her new beginning printed in black ink. At home, Eric noticed the calm in her face. "You look different," he said. Ruth smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." He chuckled nervously. "You're not planning on going anywhere, are you?" "No," she said softly. "Not yet." That night, Ruth cooked dinner meatloaf, his favorite. She served them both, poured wine, and let them talk. All the while, the recorder sat beneath the table again, listening. "After she's gone," Jenna whispered, "we'll sell the house fast. The market's hot." Eric laughed quietly. "To new beginnings." When they toasted, Ruth smiled. "To new beginnings," she echoed. And in that moment, she realized the line between revenge and survival had already disappeared. Days passed. The recordings piled up their greed, their impatience, their plans to have her moved out by the end of summer. Each file was a weapon carved from their own words. Ruth began to sleep again, not peacefully but with purpose. One morning, as she folded laundry, she heard Jenna on the phone in the next room. "Yes, that's right, early August. Once it's official, we can start the listing." "A pause." "No, she doesn't know a thing." Ruth smiled to herself. She would. By now, the fear was gone. The storm that had once soaked her bones had become something else entirely, a quiet, focused fire. That afternoon, she returned to Daniel's office with the files. He listened in silence, nodding. "They'll have no defense," he said. "If they push, we push harder." Ruth met his gaze. "No court, no press. I don't want pity, I want peace. Then we'll make sure you get it." As she left the office, the sun caught her reflection in the glass door. Not the abandoned woman in the storm, but someone reborn, sharper, stronger. That night, while the house slept, Ruth packed a small suitcase, a few clothes, her husband's medals, and the flash drive with every recording. She slipped it into her pocket and stood at the doorway, listening to the steady tick of the kitchen clock. For 40 years, that clock had marked her life by other people's needs. Tonight, it counted down to hers. Just before dawn, Ruth picked up the phone and called Daniel again. Her voice didn't tremble this time. "It's done," she said. "They've confessed to everything." A pause, then Daniel's calm reply. "Then, Mrs. Bennett, it's your turn to disappear." When the sun rose, Ruth was already gone. Not vanished like they had done to her, gone with precision, with purpose. She'd left the breakfast table set exactly as they liked it, coffee brewing, toast in the rack, her chair empty but not forgotten. The house looked alive, even welcoming. But her room, the one Jenna had stolen for her yoga mats and mirrors, was spotless. Not a hairpin, not a folded scarf. Only a small yellow note on the dresser that read, "Do not touch anything. You'll want to see what comes next." By the time Eric wandered in, still half asleep, Ruth was already sitting across town in Daniel Whitaker's office. "We start today," he said, sliding a folder toward her. Inside were documents she never thought she'd sign. Full transfer of property, closed accounts, and a power of attorney not to Eric, but to herself alone. Daniel adjusted his glasses. "When they realize what you've done, they'll panic. Let them. We'll be waiting." Ruth nodded, her eyes fixed on the list of numbers, the total value of her savings, her home, her life's work. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how money can measure what people think you're worth." Daniel smiled. "It's not about the money anymore, Ruth. It's about the story you get to tell next." Later that day, Ruth stopped by a small real estate office. She met a woman named Marie, kind eyes and a voice that sounded like the sea. "You're sure you want to sell fast?" Marie asked. "It's a seller's market, but you could get more if you wait." "I've waited long enough," Ruth replied. The papers were signed by dusk. The sale would close in 10 days. The funds protected, untouchable, would transfer to her new account the next morning. That night, Ruth returned home one last time. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She found Eric and Jenna in the living room, watching TV, their laughter filling the house like static. "Mom," Eric said, startled, "where have you been all day?" "Out," she said, "running errands." He frowned. "You didn't take the car, did you? I needed it." She smiled faintly. "Don't worry, you won't need it much longer." They exchanged uneasy glances. Jenna tilted her head. "You okay, Ruth? You seem different." "Maybe I finally am." She excused herself and went to her old bedroom, or what was left of it. The empty floor reflected the streetlight through the blinds, cutting stripes of pale gold across the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened her purse, and placed the small recorder next to her phone. Tonight, she didn't need it. Tonight, everything that needed to be said would be said out loud. Down the hall, Eric and Jenna's voices rose. "Something's off," Jenna whispered. "She's been gone all day, and she's too calm." "She can't do anything," Eric muttered. "She's old, not stupid. Big difference." Ruth almost laughed. An hour later, she went to the kitchen and brewed herself tea, the same chamomile she'd sipped through sleepless nights when Eric was a baby. The scent filled the air, warm and floral, a small comfort before a necessary storm. She rehearsed the words she'd waited her whole life to say. "You don't own me. You never did." At midnight, she slipped the flash drive of recordings into an envelope and sealed it. Written on the front, "If anything happens to me, deliver to police." She placed it in the mailbox outside, the flag raised high. Then she went to bed, not peacefully but unafraid. Because in the morning, everything would end one way or another. As Ruth drifted to sleep, the recorder on her nightstand blinked once, then stopped. In the quiet that followed, a single question hung in the dark like a loaded gun. When they wake up tomorrow, who will still be here? The morning began like any other light creeping through the blinds, the faint rattle of dishes in the sink, the smell of coffee. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something was different. Ruth was already sitting at the kitchen table, fully dressed, her suitcase by the door. Eric walked in first, bleary-eyed, still half in a dream. "You're up early," he mumbled. "I didn't sleep," Ruth said. Her tone was calm, but the air in the room had changed thicker, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Jenna entered a minute later, tying her robe, smile ready. "Morning, Ruth. I was just about to—" "Sit," Ruth said. The word landed heavy, not loud, not angry, just final. They both froze, confused by the authority in her voice. Ruth slid a manila envelope across the table. "You should read this." Eric frowned, tore it open, and began scanning the pages. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. "These are," he stammered. "Transfer papers," Ruth said. "The house is sold. The accounts are closed. Every cent you plan to take is gone." Jenna's face went pale. "You can't." "Oh, but I can," Ruth interrupted. "You made me feel like I had no power left. That was your mistake." She leaned forward, eyes sharp and steady. "This is still my name on the deed, my money, my life, and you don't get to decide what happens to it." Eric slammed the papers down. "What did you do?" "What you tried to do," she said quietly. "But better." Jenna's voice cracked. "Ruth, we were just trying to help." "Help?" Ruth snapped, the calm finally breaking. "You left me in a storm, Jenna, on the side of the highway. Do you call that helping?" The words hit the room like a hammer. For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. Ruth reached into her purse and took out the small recorder, pressing play. Their own voices filled the kitchen. "She won't fight back. She's too proud. Once she's gone, we sell the house." Jenna covered her mouth. Eric looked like he might be sick. "Every word," Ruth said. "Saved, copied, sent to my lawyer." She stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "You thought I was weak because I was old, but you forget people like me built everything you're standing on." The silence that followed was different now, less about guilt, more about defeat. Eric's shoulders sagged, the weight of what he'd done settling in. Jenna's eyes filled, but no apology came. Ruth looked at them both, her voice calm again. "You wanted me gone. You'll get your wish." She picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. Eric took a step forward. "Mom, wait." Ruth turned, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not the polite smile of someone trying to keep peace, but the smile of someone free. 40 years, she said softly. "That's how long I lived for everyone else. The next one's mine." She opened the door. Sunlight flooded in. Behind her, Eric whispered something she didn't catch. Jenna began to cry. Their house suddenly looked small. Outside, a breeze lifted the edges of Ruth's hair. She breathed deep, the air clean, her lungs light. The world was wide again. She didn't look back, not once. As Ruth's cab pulled away from the curb, her phone buzzed an unknown number. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she answered. "Mrs. Bennett," a familiar voice said. It was Daniel Whitaker. "It's done, but there's something else. You should probably see." The drive into town was quiet. Ruth watched the familiar streets pass by the diner, the post office, the park where she once pushed Eric on a swing. Everything looked the same, and yet it wasn't. She was no longer part of it. She was a visitor passing through the ruins of her own life. The cab stopped in front of Daniel Whitaker's office, a small brick building with flaking white paint and a hanging sign that creaked in the wind. Ruth took a slow breath before stepping out. Inside, Daniel was waiting, a folder already open on his desk. His face was calm, but there was something behind his eyes' concern. "You did it," he said quietly. "I heard the recording. You were brave, Ruth." "Brave or foolish," she said. "I'm not sure anymore." He slid a document across the table. "Your house sale is finalized. Funds are secured in your new account. They can't touch a dime." Ruth nodded. "Good. That's all I wanted." Daniel hesitated. "That's not all I called about." He turned the folder around. Inside were printouts, bank statements, emails, property transfers. "I ran a background check on your son's finances," he said. "He and his wife aren't just broke, Ruth. They're deep in debt. Credit cards, loans, everything. They even took out a line of credit under your name 2 months ago." Ruth blinked slowly, the words landing like cold rain. "My name?" Daniel nodded. "They forged your signature. That's fraud. We can press charges, but once we do, there's no going back." Ruth stared at the papers, the neat rows of numbers and dates. Each one was a wound she hadn't known she'd been bleeding from. "So they weren't just trying to take the house," she said. "They were already using me." "Yes," Daniel replied softly. "And they would have kept doing it until there was nothing left." The room went still. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far away, not for her, but it might as well have been. "Can we stop it?" she asked. "We already did. The accounts are frozen. The fraud report is filed. They'll be contacted within the week." Ruth exhaled, slow and long. "Then it's over." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Maybe for them, but not for you." He stood, walked to the window, and pulled down the blinds halfway. "You've been through hell, Ruth. Don't let this be the end of your story. Start something new, anywhere you want." She smiled faintly. "I don't even know where to start." "Then start where you're wanted," he said. Ruth nodded. That evening, she took a train north, following Daniel's suggestion, a quiet coastal town where the air smelled like salt and clean beginnings. The ride was long, rhythmic, the kind of travel that makes you think about the things you've survived. She thought of her husband, his laugh, the way he called her, "my stubborn little oak." She thought of Eric as a boy, the night she stayed up sewing his Halloween costume, the morning she went without breakfast so he could have milk in his cereal. She thought of the night on the highway, the rain, the silence, the white sedan that never came back. She wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly, just done. When the train reached the coast, the platform was empty except for a fisherman packing his gear. Ruth stepped off, her suitcase rattling behind her, and inhaled the sharp sea air. It didn't smell like freedom yet, but it didn't smell like fear either. Daniel had already arranged everything. A small apartment near the boardwalk, prepaid for a year. Modest, clean, and hers. When she turned the key, the sound echoed through the empty space. No furniture, no photos, just light. She walked to the window and looked out at the water. Waves rolled in and out, endless and unbothered. For the first time in decades, Ruth realized she didn't owe anyone an explanation for where she was or who she'd become. Still, as she unpacked her suitcase, she found herself hesitating at one item, the envelope she'd written, "If anything happens to me, deliver to police." She smiled. "Guess you won't be needed after all," she whispered, tucking it into a drawer. Then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something instinct, fate, whatever was left of her curiosity made her answer. "Mrs. Bennett?" a woman's voice said. "This is Detective Alvarez with the state police. We received your attorney's report. There's been a development." Ruth's breath caught. "What kind of development?" The detective hesitated. Your son and daughter-in-law, they came in this morning, said you disappeared. They're claiming you took their money. Ruth went still. The ocean outside blurred into gray. They filed a missing person report, the detective continued, and a fraud claim in your name. Ruth almost laughed a hollow, astonished sound. They're still trying to rewrite the story, she said softly. The detective sighed. We just wanted to hear your side before we move forward. Do you want to press formal charges? Ruth looked out the window again. The tide was coming in, strong and certain. Her voice, when it came, was calm. No, let them live with what they've done. That's punishment enough. The detective paused. Are you sure, ma'am? Because there's one more thing. Ruth frowned. What is it? A beat of silence. Then, they're on their way to find you. The call ended with a click that seemed to echo through the empty apartment. Ruth stood there for a long moment, phone still in hand, the sound of the ocean swelling through the cracked window. Outside, gulls screamed over the boardwalk, the wind carrying the smell of salt and deep water. They're on their way to find you. She whispered the words out loud, just to hear them in the air. They didn't sound like fear anymore, they sounded like confirmation. Of course they'd come. People like that never chased love, only ownership. She placed the phone down on the counter, poured herself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. Her reflection in the window looked older, steadier. Not the woman who'd been left on the side of a highway, but the woman who had walked away before the next storm could hit. Still, a question lingered. What would they do now that they'd lost everything? That evening, as the sun began to drop behind the horizon, Ruth sat at her small kitchen table, the same folder of documents spread out before her bank transfers, recordings, letters from Daniel. She thought about what she'd done. Not revenge, not cruelty, just balance. The scales finally evened. At 7:30, there was a knock. 3 short taps, hesitant. Ruth didn't move. She let the silence stretch until the knocking came again, this time louder. Mom? Eric's voice, muffled through the door. Please, I just want to talk. Her heartbeat quickened, but her hands didn't tremble. She looked around the apartment, tidy, peaceful, untouched by their chaos. She'd earned this quiet. Mom, please. A pause. We know you're in there. Jenna's voice followed, softer, almost pleading. We made a mistake. We were desperate. We didn't mean to. Ruth stepped closer, stopping just short of the door. Desperate, she said to herself. That's what they call it. She took a breath and spoke loud enough for them to hear. You left me on a highway in the middle of a storm. You sold my things. You forged my name. What exactly didn't you mean to do? Silence. Eric tried again. We were wrong. We know that now. Just, let's start over. Please. Her throat tightened, not from emotion, but from the memory of that rain, the sound of tires, the cold, the realization that she'd been erased. She touched the scar on her wrist, still faint from the night she'd stumbled on the asphalt trying to chase them. Start over, she repeated. You can't start over when the ending was your choice. She imagined them standing there soaked in guilt, or maybe just panic, faces pale under the flickering hall light. They wanted the door to open so they could rewrite the story, pretend it was misunderstanding, pretend she was still the forgiving mother who fixed their mistakes. But Ruth Bennett wasn't that woman anymore. She looked around her apartment one last time, the framed photo of her late husband, the small plant by the window already leaning toward the light, the kitchen counter lined with her favorite mug and a single plate. Everything she needed, nothing she didn't. Her phone buzzed again, Daniel's name. She answered quietly. They're here, she said. Do you want me to call the police? She thought for a long second. No, I'll handle it. Ruth. Daniel's voice softened. You don't owe them forgiveness. I'm not giving it, she said. I'm giving them a door that stays closed. She ended the call, walked to the door, and placed her hand on the knob not to open it, but to feel the separation. Eric's voice came again, cracking now. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I just want to see you. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she saw him as he was at 8 years old, running down the beach, laughing, his small hand reaching for hers. That boy was gone. The man outside had buried him long ago. Ruth lowered her hand and stepped back. Go home, Eric. she said through the wood. "There's nothing for you here." "No," he said. "Home is gone." "I know," she replied softly. "That's the point." The hallway went still. Footsteps shuffled, then, slowly, receded. Ruth stood in the quiet, the sound of their departure fading into the distance. No tears, no shaking, just stillness, the rarest kind of peace. She turned the lock, not out of fear but finality. Later, she stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool, the ocean black and endless. A street musician played a slow blues tune somewhere down the boardwalk, a song about leaving, about learning when enough is enough. She listened until the music faded, then whispered to no one in particular, "I forgive you, but I won't come back." Inside, her phone vibrated once more. A text from Daniel. "You did the right thing." She typed back, "I know." As Ruth set her phone down, she noticed something under the door. A folded piece of paper slid quietly from the hall. Her name was written on it in shaky handwriting, and beneath it 2 words that made her heart stop. "Help us." For a long time, Ruth didn't move. The piece of paper lay half crumpled on the floor, the handwriting trembling even on the loops of her name. She could tell whose it was, Eric's. Years of signing permission slips and birthday cards made the pen strokes familiar. "Help us." 2 words that could mean anything. A threat, a plea, a trap. Outside, waves crashed against the pier pilings. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. She bent down, picked up the paper, and unfolded it carefully. There was more written on the back, jagged and uneven, as if scrawled in a rush. "They took everything. We're being followed. Please, Mom." Ruth's brow furrowed. "They?" she murmured. Her first thought was disbelief, another manipulation, another story. But something about the handwriting stopped her, shaky, desperate, almost childlike. It wasn't the steady arrogance she'd seen in Eric before. This looked like fear, real fear. She sat at the kitchen table, the note between her fingers. If it was true, who could they be? Loan sharks? The same people behind the debts Daniel uncovered? Maybe Eric had dug himself deeper than she realized. Her instincts warred with her reason. Every nerve told her to stay away, to protect the quiet life she'd just begun. But motherhood isn't something you erase with a change of address. It lingers, inconvenient and stubborn. By nightfall, the phone rang again. This time, an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Bennett?" a man's voice asked. "This is Detective Alvarez again. We've located your son's vehicle outside Trenton, abandoned." Ruth's chest tightened. "Abandoned?" "Yes, ma'am. The doors were unlocked. Inside were personal items, cell phones, wallets, a purse. No sign of your son or his wife." She closed her eyes. For a moment she was back on that rainy highway, staring at an empty parking spot, the air humming with absence. The detective continued. "We've also received reports of a loan group connected to the fraud in your case. These people are dangerous. If your son owed them money, it's possible they're trying to reach you too." Ruth's grip tightened on the receiver. "So that's who they are," she whispered. "We'll keep an officer nearby in case you hear from them," Alvarez said. "But if you do, don't go anywhere alone." When the call ended, Ruth stood by the window. Below, the boardwalk lights blinked in patterns, reflections stretching across the dark water like Morse code. "Help us." The note still sat on the table behind her. She thought of the years she'd spent rescuing Eric from scraped knees, bad grades, broken hearts. Every time he fell, she'd been there to pick him up. This time, though, she wasn't sure if saving him would mean losing herself again. Hours passed, midnight, then 1 a.m. The town quieted. Ruth sat at her table, staring at the folded note. Finally, she slid it into her purse. "I'll find out what happened," she whispered. "But I'm not walking into another storm blind." The next morning, she met Daniel at his office. The exhaustion in his eyes mirrored her own. She handed him the note. "They're in trouble," she said. Daniel read it twice. "It could be real, or it could be bait. Either way, you're not going alone." They mapped out a plan. The police would track the last GPS ping from Eric's car. Ruth would stay nearby but not approach until they knew more. That evening, Alvarez called. We found something near the industrial park outside Trenton. Footprints, 2 sets, and tire marks leading toward the river. We're bringing in divers." Ruth pressed a hand to her chest. "No," she whispered, "not the river." The line went quiet for a beat. "We'll keep you informed, ma'am." When she hung up, she sat in the dark for a long while, the sound of distant thunder rolling over the ocean. A flash of lightning lit up the window just like that night on the highway. And in that moment, Ruth knew one thing with cold certainty. Whatever had found her son and his wife was coming for her next. The storm came in slow, a rolling bruise of clouds moving in from the Atlantic, the kind that swallowed the horizon before anyone noticed it was gone. Ruth stood at the window of her apartment, watching the ocean turn the color of iron. The wind rattled the glass. The world outside felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel had called earlier. The divers found nothing. No car, no bodies, only a tire track veering off the riverbank and ending in mud. "Could have been staged," he'd said. "Could have been a warning." Ruth didn't reply then, and she didn't reply now. She just watched the storm roll closer. At 6 o'clock, the power flickered. The lights went out for a few seconds, then came back weaker, humming. She lit a candle and sat at her small kitchen table, the flame trembling with every gust through the cracked window. On the table lay Eric's note, still creased, still smudged with something that might have been rain or tears. "Help us." The words had changed since she first read them. They no longer sounded like manipulation. They sounded like the truth she'd been too tired to believe. She thought of Eric's voice at the door just days ago, shaking, desperate, of Jenna's silence behind him. What if it hadn't been an act? What if someone really was following them, the same lone group Daniel mentioned? A soft knock at the door made her heart freeze. Once, twice, then silence. Ruth didn't move. The candlelight flickered. Another knock, louder this time. "Mrs. Bennett?" a man's voice said, muffled but steady. "Detective Alvarez." She opened the door just enough to see his badge glint in the candlelight. The rain had already soaked his coat. "Sorry to come unannounced," he said. "We traced a call a burner phone used near the Trenton River. We think your son might have tried to contact you again." Ruth's throat went dry. "Is he alive?" Alvarez hesitated. "We don't know, but there's something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clear evidence bag. Inside was a small silver locket, one Ruth hadn't seen in years. Inside it was a faded photo of a young Eric on her lap, both of them smiling. "We found this in the mud near the riverbank." Ruth took the bag, her fingers trembling. "This was mine," she whispered. "I gave it to him when he was 10. Alvarez nodded. "We're doing everything we can, but if someone's targeting your family, we need you somewhere safe, maybe a hotel for a few nights." She shook her head. "I'm not running. Not again." He sighed. "Then keep the doors locked. If anyone contacts you, anyone call me directly." He handed her a card, nodded once, and left. When the door clicked shut, Ruth sat in the silence. The candle flame bent in the draft, its shadow stretching across the wall like a ghost. She opened the locket, traced her thumb over the tiny photo, and felt something sharp, a folded scrap of paper wedged behind the picture. Carefully, she pried it loose. The message was barely legible, written in hurried pencil. "Don't trust him." Ruth's breath caught. The words were underlined twice. She read them again, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Don't trust him." She looked toward the door where Detective Alvarez had just stood. Then toward the candle, its flame trembling as if it too understood. Her mind raced. Was the note new? Old? Could Eric have hidden it there years ago? Or was it recent, written before the river, before he vanished? And who was him? Daniel? Alvarez? Someone else entirely? She grabbed her phone, opened the last call log, Alvarez's number, Daniel's number, and hesitated. For the first time since that night on the highway, she didn't know who was on her side. The storm outside broke open. Rain lashed the window like nails. The lights flickered again once, twice, and then died completely. The apartment fell into darkness. Only the candle remained, its light small and shaking, the flame reflected in Ruth's wide, terrified eyes. Then, through the howling wind, came a sound she'd never forget, 3 slow knocks on the door, the same rhythm as before. But this time a voice followed, low, wet, almost whispering. "Mom, it's me." For a moment, the storm itself seemed to pause. Even the wind outside the window stopped pushing against the glass. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. That voice, it couldn't be. It was hoarse, broken, but still unmistakable. "Eric?" she whispered. "Mom, please." The sound of his voice was muffled by the wood, trembling between exhaustion and panic. "They're coming. You have to let me in." Every instinct inside her screamed two different truths at once, one maternal, one primal. "That's your son, and right behind it, don't open the door." She looked down at the locket again, the message still pressed between her fingers. "Don't trust him." The handwriting had been Eric's. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Eric, where's Jenna?" No answer. The candle flickered violently as another gust shook the building. "Eric?" she said louder. A long pause. Then, "She's gone." Her heart twisted. Gone. The word could mean 100 things. What happened? He coughed hard, the sound ragged and wet. "They took her, the people I owed. I thought I could fix it, Mom. I swear I tried." Ruth closed her eyes, gripping the back of the chair to steady herself. The room seemed to tilt, the storm leaning into the walls like a giant hand. "They're still looking for me," he said. "Please, just let me in. I don't have anywhere else to go." The tone, the desperation was exactly like the night she'd left him on the porch and locked the door behind her. The symmetry of it hit her like a cruel joke. Ruth took one slow step toward the door, then another. She reached out, hand hovering over the lock, then froze. A second voice came from the hallway. A woman's voice, soft, cautious. "Mrs. Bennett?" Ruth's eyes widened. Detective Alvarez's voice. "Stay away from the door," Alvarez said firmly. "We've got this." "What's going on?" Ruth shouted through the wood. "Your son's not alone," Alvarez said. "There's someone with him, armed." Ruth backed away slowly, the candle flame shaking in her unsteady grip. Her mind spun the note, the warning, the timing. None of it made sense, but all of it fit too well to be coincidence. Outside the door, a thud, then a muffled yell. "Mom, don't listen to them, please. They're lying to you." A louder crash followed boots, shouting, a flash of blue light under the doorframe. Ruth stumbled back, covering her mouth as gunfire cracked through the hallway, two sharp pops, deafening in the storm's lull. Then silence. Long, awful silence. Her heart hammered so hard she thought she'd faint. The candle had gone out. The only light now came from the flashing strobes outside, blue-white, blue again reflecting off the wet glass like ghosts. When the knock finally came again, it was steady, measured. "Mrs. Bennett," a voice called. "It's over. You're safe now." It was Alvarez again, but her tone had changed, colder, flatter, almost rehearsed. Ruth's hand hovered above the knob. The storm outside began to fade, leaving the faint hiss of rain and the crackle of police radios below. She didn't open the door. Not yet. Because after everything, the highway, the lies, the betrayals, she'd learned one final unshakable truth. Safety is never the same as trust. She stepped back, heart pounding, and whispered to herself, "Not until I see the light." Then a flashlight beam slipped under the door, thin, white, and trembling, followed by the sound of a voice she didn't expect to hear again. "Mom," it whispered, weak but clear. "They shot her, and they're coming for you next." The beam of light under the door flickered once, then vanished. For a moment, the only sound in Ruth's apartment was her own heartbeat, heavy, uneven, alive. She took one trembling step toward the door. "Eric?" she called out. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, swallowed by the sound of distant sirens. "Eric, if that's you, say something." Nothing. Only the faint hiss of rain and the metallic hum of the storm drain outside. She turned the lock halfway. The metal clicked, then stopped. A shadow moved under the door. Slow, deliberate. "Eric, are you hurt?" The voice on the other side was ragged. "It's me, Mom. Please. I didn't know who else to." Then a muffled thud, like a body hitting the wall, followed by another voice, deeper, controlled, almost clinical. "Mrs. Bennett, This is Detective Alvarez. Stay inside. Two voices. Both right, both wrong. Ruth pressed her hand against the cool wood. "Tell me something only my son would know," she said. Silence. Then, "You used to hum Blue Moon when I couldn't sleep." Her throat tightened. He was right. The lullaby she'd sung every night until he was 7. But before she could answer, Alvarez's voice cut in sharply. "Don't open that door. That's not your son." The words hit like lightning. Ruth froze, hand still on the lock. "Ma'am." Alvarez's voice came again, closer now, panting as if she was running. "He's not your son. He's one of them. He—" A loud crash interrupted her wood splintering somewhere down the hall, followed by gunfire, the sound of boots slamming against concrete. Ruth stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. The apartment filled with chaos shouts, the thud of bodies, the sharp snap of another gunshot. Then, silence again. Only the rain, relentless against the glass. Ruth crouched low behind the counter, clutching the candle like it could protect her. The smell of smoke from somewhere in the building seeped into the room. A shadow appeared in the doorway, tall, slow-moving. She couldn't see a face, only the outline of a wet coat and something metallic glinting in the figure's hand. She grabbed the locket, clutching it tight against her chest, as if it could tell her what to believe. The figure spoke soft, shaking. "Mom." Ruth felt her breath catch. It was Eric. It had to be. He stepped into the candlelight, face pale, a thin streak of blood across his temple. He was shaking, not from cold but from fear. His eyes darted toward the door behind him, where the hallway lights flickered erratically. "She's dead," he whispered. "The detective. They shot her. I ran." Ruth's knees almost gave out. "Who's they?" He hesitated. His lip trembled. "The people I borrowed from. The ones who—" Behind him, down the hall. A sound. Boots. Heavy. Purposeful. Eric's eyes widened. "Mom, please. We have to go." Ruth looked past him, to the front door, the windows, the locket in her hand. Every instinct screamed that this was the same choice she'd been given before the same moment, all over again. The storm outside roared louder, the wind bending the trees until their branches clawed the glass. "Mom," Eric pleaded, "please." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But her pulse, her gut, the message in the locket, "Don't trust him," kept echoing in her mind. "Who wrote this?" she whispered, holding up the tiny note between her fingers. Eric blinked, confused. "What?" "This note. In the locket you dropped. Who wrote it?" He stared at her for too long, just long enough for the silence to become its own kind of answer. Then his expression shifted. The fear in his eyes hardened into something else, calculation. "You shouldn't have found that," he said quietly. Before she could react, a knock thundered on the door behind him, 3 hard hits that rattled the frame. "Police, open up!" Eric flinched, panic flashing across his face. Don't listen to them," he stammered. "They're not cops." Ruth took a step back. The candlelight wavered between them, her son's shadow stretching long across the floor like a stranger's. The pounding on the door grew louder. "Mrs. Bennett, this is the real police. Open the door and step away from the suspect." Her breath came in shallow gasps. She looked at Eric trembling, eyes wild, then back at the door. Her mind split in two. Trust the badge or trust the blood? Either way, someone was lying. Then Eric whispered something that froze her where she stood. "Mom, if you open that door, they'll kill us both." The pounding on the door didn't stop. Each hit echoed like a gunshot, shaking the thin walls of the apartment. Rain sprayed through the cracked window. The wind moaned through the gap beneath the door. Ruth's hands trembled around the candle. Its light bent and swayed, splitting her son's face in half angel, half stranger. "Eric," she whispered, "tell me the truth. Right now." He was breathing hard, pupils wide, one hand hidden in his jacket pocket. "They're not here to help you," he said. "They work for them, the ones I owed. They've been after your money ever since I told them you had more." "You told them?" Her voice cracked. He looked away. "I didn't mean to, Mom. They made me." Another round of pounding, louder now. "Mrs. Bennett, we have a warrant. Open the door now." Her chest ached. Every word, every breath was a collision between fear and disbelief. She stared at her son, the man who'd left her on a highway, who'd stolen her name, who'd begged for her help, and still, some quiet part of her wanted to protect him. "Move away from the door!" shouted a voice outside. Eric flinched, took a step back, and pulled his hand from his pocket. It wasn't a weapon, it was a photograph. Old, creased, water-stained. He held it out like a confession. "I kept this. You and me. The boardwalk, remember?" Her throat tightened. She remembered. He'd been 6, his front tooth missing. She'd bought him cotton candy. But something else caught her eye, the faint smear of blood on the corner of the photo. Fresh. "Eric," she said slowly. "Whose blood is that?" He didn't answer. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then the sound of boots spreading apart, tactical movement. "Last warning," the officer yelled. "Open the door or we'll breach." Ruth took a step toward her son. "If I open this door, do they kill you? Or do they kill me?" Eric's voice dropped to a whisper. "Both of us." Her pulse surged in her ears. And then crash. The door burst inward, the lock tearing from the frame. 3 armed officers flooded in, shouting commands. The candle fell and went out, plunging the room into half-darkness. "Drop your weapon," someone yelled. "I don't have one," Eric screamed, hands up, wild-eyed. "I'm not armed." Ruth pressed herself against the wall as red and blue lights flashed through the rain-soaked window. The whole room felt underwater, slow, muffled, unreal. On the ground now. He didn't move fast enough. One of the officers shoved him down hard, knee in his back, the sound of cuffs snapping shut. "Get your hands off me!" Eric shouted, his voice breaking. Ruth's own voice rose above it all. "Wait, he's my son. He's not—" "Ma'am, stay back." She turned toward the nearest officer, a tall man with a soaked uniform and a grim expression. "He's hurt," she pleaded. "He's bleeding." The officer didn't respond. He was scanning the floor, the kitchen, the corners of the room. Then he turned his radio on. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. Target secured. Alvarez is down. Repeat, Detective Alvarez is confirmed. Kia. Possible witness compromised." Ruth froze. The words hit like ice water. Alvarez was dead. And witness compromised. That was her. Another officer approached, holding a black evidence bag. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," he said, "for your safety." Eric twisted against the cuffs. "Don't go with them, Mom, they're lying." "Quiet!" the officer snapped, tightening his grip. Ruth looked between them, the cops, her son, the blood, the rain. Every face in the room looked like an answer she didn't trust. Then, over the radio, a voice crackled through the static. "Negative. Extraction on Mrs. Bennett postponed. Secondary team inbound." The tall officer frowned, confused. "What? We are the extraction team." Silence on the line. Then a new voice, cold, calm, measured. "No, you're not." And before anyone could react, the lights went out. The only thing Ruth saw before the darkness swallowed them was the glint of a flashlight beam sliding through the open doorway and the silhouette of someone holding it steady. Someone she recognized. Daniel Whitaker. Hair lawyer. Her ally. Or so she'd thought. The beam stopped on her face, and Daniel's voice came from the shadows, gentle, almost apologetic. "Ruth," he said, "you weren't supposed to see any of this." The flashlight beam hung in the air between them like a blade of white fire. Ruth could see Daniel's face now soaked from the rain, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes sunken and tired. But behind that calm lawyer's expression she'd trusted for months, there was something else, relief and guilt. He stepped forward. The officers froze. "Lower your weapons," he said evenly. "She's coming with me." The tall officer turned his gun slightly. "Sir, identify yourself." "I already did," Daniel said, holding up an ID card, not his legal credentials this time, but a darker badge, metallic, unmarked except for a number, Federal Asset Recovery Division. Ruth's stomach dropped. "Daniel, what is this?" He sighed, voice soft. "The truth, Ruth. The whole time I was helping you, I wasn't just your attorney. You and your son were under federal watch. Money laundering, asset movement, offshore accounts all linked to the people he borrowed from. Eric shook his head violently from the floor. No, that's not true. Mom, he's lying. He's one of them. Quiet, Daniel said coldly. You think you were just running from loan sharks? You were running from an organization that uses family debts to move money across borders. The house sale, the transfers, the sudden disappearance, you triggered every red flag in our system. Ruth's chest ached. You used me, she whispered. Daniel's expression softened for a moment. At first, yes, but then I saw what they did to you. I saw the kind of woman you are: resilient, smart, dangerous when pushed. You became more than a case file. Dangerous? She repeated bitterly. He nodded once. Because you did what none of them could. You cut the cord. You walked away. The lights flickered again. One of the officers spoke into his radio. Command, confirm secondary extraction. But before he could finish, a single gunshot shattered the air. Everyone ducked. The candle, long forgotten, tipped over, scattering wax across the floor. When Ruth looked up, Daniel was bleeding from the shoulder. Eric had somehow grabbed one of the fallen officer's pistols. His hands were shaking, eyes wide with pure panic. Stay back, Eric shouted. I'm not going to jail for something I didn't do. Daniel's voice stayed calm despite the blood on his shirt. Put the gun down, Eric, it's over. Shut up, you're lying. Ruth took a slow step forward. Eric, please, don't. He turned toward her, gun trembling between them. You don't understand, Mom. They were going to kill me. Jenna, too. I just wanted the money to make it stop. You tried to fix it with more lies, Ruth said quietly. And now it's finally caught up to you. He was crying now, breath ragged. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she said, but you did. His grip on the gun loosened just for a second. It was enough. Daniel lunged, disarming him in one smooth motion. The weapon clattered to the floor. Two officers pinned Eric to the ground, cuffing him as he screamed her name. Mom, please, don't let them take me. She couldn't answer. Her throat locked. Daniel staggered to his feet, pressing his hand to the bleeding shoulder. He'll be processed, he said quietly. He's safer in custody than out there. Those men don't leave loose ends. Ruth turned to him, tears running freely now. And me? He looked at her for a long time. You're free, Ruth. Really free. Your accounts are clean. Your name's cleared. You can disappear if you want. New address, new identity, new start. She wanted to scream or cry or thank him, but all that came out was a whisper. After all this, what happens to the truth? Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. The truth doesn't always get a headline. Sometimes it just gets to live quietly. He motioned to one of the officers. Take her somewhere safe. She's done enough. When Ruth stepped out of the apartment for the last time, dawn was breaking over the ocean. The storm had passed. The sky was pale gray, streaked with gold, the kind of light that doesn't erase the dark but forgives it. Down below, paramedics were loading Eric into a van. His head hung low, face hidden beneath a blanket. She wanted to run to him, to hold him, to say something that might matter. But her body wouldn't move. Instead, she whispered the only thing she could. I hope you find peace, my son. A few weeks later, Ruth was living under a different name, in a small coastal town upstate, a place with foggy mornings and quiet streets. She rented a second-floor apartment over a bakery. Every morning she helped the old owner set up the pastry case, and every evening she walked along the pier listening to the gulls. Sometimes she still thought about that night, about the candle, the storm, the sound of Eric's voice behind the door. But the memory no longer tore her apart. It was just another scar that proved she'd survived. One morning, she received a plain envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I'm sorry, Mom. They said they'd let me go if I talked. I didn't. I kept your name clean. Be free. E. Ruth folded the letter and held it to her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from release. As the sun climbed higher, lighting the edge of the water, she whispered to the wind, I forgive you. Some storms wash things away, others reveal what was always there. And for Ruth Bennett, freedom didn't come when she was saved, it came when she stopped waiting to be rescued.